I was early to a kid sitting gig with a celebrity family I used to work for regularly. Both parents are well-known actors, and I loved working for them. At the time, I was pursuing a nursing degree, so babysitting wasn't exactly part of my long-term career plan. But whenever this family called, I tried to make myself available. I adored their kids, and I had tremendous respect for them as parents. When I arrived that evening, they were wrapping up what looked like a casual visit with a friend, a tiny blonde woman in jeans and a white t-shirt who had this incredibly sweet, vivacious energy. Everyone was gathered in the kitchen while the kids sat at the table making paper bag puppets. When the parents realized what time it was, they apologized to their guest and rushed upstairs to finish getting ready for their night out. She waved them off. Her driver was apparently on the way, and she was perfectly content to hang out with me and the kids until he arrived. Dinner was already prepared. The kids were happily occupied. So I found myself standing beside this tiny blonde woman at the kitchen sink, watching the kids make their puppets. We started talking. I mentioned how much I loved working for this particular family. I told her they were wonderful parents, very intentional about being present with their children despite demanding careers. I've always believed that when you're caring for someone else's children, you're not just there to keep them alive until their parents come home. You're supporting a family system. You're helping busy parents bridge the gap between their responsibilities and their children's emotional needs. And this family made that easy because they were already such a well-oiled little machine of love, communication, and integrity. The woman seemed genuinely touched by this. She told me how much she loved hearing that people she worked with were good people behind closed doors, especially with their children. I suddenly became self-conscious because I realized, wait, who exactly am I talking to? I had no idea what her relationship was to this family. And here I was gushing about their private home life to a complete stranger. So I stopped talking. She smiled and encouraged me to continue. I looked back toward the children, partly because I was embarrassed and partly because I needed a moment to decide what I could appropriately say. The kids had started squabbling over a marker, and that's when I noticed a lovely young woman in a blue dress quietly helping them settle down. She had a peaceful presence. She wasn't interrupting anyone or drawing attention to herself. She was simply there with the children. Around that time, the dad came back downstairs. He overheard enough of our conversation to understand why I was hesitating and assured me that it was okay. He was actually curious himself. I still felt awkward. I said something about not wanting to tell personal stories about their family to someone I didn't know. He looked confused for a second, then he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you knew her." And he introduced us. "Libby, this is Dolly. Dolly, this is the kid's favorite sitter, Libby." Dolly. Okay. I started to shake her hand and was about to start saying, "It's nice to meet you." And the second our hands touched, an electric shock shot up my arm. We both pulled back. "I'm sorry," I blurted out. I was mortified. I'm always zapping things. I don't know why. I wish I could blame the time of year, but it happens constantly. Probably why my hair is always such a mess. Classic me. Experience something strange, immediately make a joke. Then the dad got called back upstairs. So there I was alone again with Dolly. I still did not understand that this was Dolly Parton. I asked her whether Dolly was her real name or a nickname. She laughed. I think that's when she realized I genuinely had no idea who she was. She told me, yes, Dolly was the name of her mama gave her, and then asked whether Libby was my real name. I told her it wasn't. It was a childhood nickname I'd never grown out of. But I'd been told that Libby could be understood as my heart in Aramaic. So I'd stopped trying to shed it and become rather fond of it. Now that I had the father's permission to tell her something personal, I decided to explain why I admired this family so much. I told her about the first time I ever babysat for them. The parents were getting ready for an award show that night. The mom was presenting that evening and was already dressed in her gown when one of her children started having a complete meltdown. The child was exhausted and frustrated with a toy. And instead of telling the child to stop crying or rushing off because she had somewhere important to be, the mother had sat down on the floor in her gown. Everything else became secondary. She held her child close and calmly guided them through deep breaths, matching their breathing, helping them regulate instead of demanding that they simply calm down. And I watched this little person go from overwhelmed and inconsolable to peaceful because they trusted their mother completely. It was beautiful. I told Dolly that was the moment I understood what kind of family I was working for. Yes, these children were growing up surrounded by celebrity and wealth and all the strange privileges that come with that world. But their parents were teaching them that relationships mattered more. Communication mattered more. Being trustworthy mattered more. And family came first. Dolly and I stood quietly for a moment, watching the children. Then my curiosity got the better of me. I looked toward the young woman in blue who had been helping the children and asked Dolly, "Is that your assistant?" Dolly looked at me. Her expression changed. "You can see her too." Before I could answer, something happened. My head snapped backward. It felt as though an enormous, invisible force was pushing against my entire body. I grabbed the edge of the kitchen counter. My ears began ringing, except ringing doesn't really describe it. It was deeper than that. An enormous, rhythmic vibration. Om, om, om. Almost like a drum roll inside my skull. The pressure in my ears kept cracking. My whole body seemed to pulse with it. For a few seconds, I felt like I was standing directly in front of a speeding train waiting for impact. I thought I was losing consciousness, and then it stopped. I was still gripping the counter. I couldn't catch my breath. And just as suddenly, Dolly grabbed my left arm hard. "Did you feel that?" she asked. I looked at her. She looked shaken too. But there was something else in her expression now. Wonder, interest, almost recognition. "I thought it was just me," I managed to say. "I thought I was going to pass out." And because apparently my nervous system has only 2 settings, make a joke or cry, I was desperately trying not to burst into tears. Dolly kept hold of my arm and looked directly into my eyes. And then she said something I have never forgotten. "People don't necessarily know this about me, but I'm very spiritual." She asked if I was spiritual too. Then she told me experiences like that happened to her around people who were spiritually strong. At which point I started babbling. People had always called me an old soul. I had strange experiences my whole life. I could sometimes see auras. I was unusually sensitive to people's energy. Maybe that was part of why I connected so naturally with children. I was just throwing words at what had happened because I had absolutely no framework for it. Then the parents came downstairs. They took one look at our faces and immediately asked if something was wrong. Dolly and I looked at each other. Neither of us seemed to know what to say. "We're fine," we chorused. Dolly excused herself to the bathroom. The parents checked in with the kids while I remained beside the sink trying to convince my legs to work normally again, and that it was okay to unclench my grip from the counter. Eventually, I made it to the refrigerator and poured myself a glass of orange juice. The parents came over and asked again if I was okay. I said yes. They asked what Dolly and I had been talking about, so I told them. And they started wondering where she was because she still hadn't returned from the bathroom. They said that when they'd walked into the kitchen, both of us had looked genuinely shaken. And then a thought occurred to me. Was there an earthquake? I asked. That alarmed them. They immediately pulled out their phones. Nothing. No earthquake. Eventually, Dolly returned. She said she had been on the phone with her driver and he was close. She hugged me and told me we should stay in touch. She gave me an email address for one of her assistants and told me he would make sure anything I sent reached her. The address was associated with the foundation, so naturally I asked what the foundation was. She explained that it was connected to a children's literacy program that gave books to kids. I remember marveling at that idea. How do you afford to give away that many books? I asked. Everyone started laughing because somehow, after spending all this time with her, I still hadn't figured it out. Before leaving, Dolly told me I had a nice speaking voice and said she could tell I had vocal training. I told her the closest thing I'd had to serious training was church choir and community theater. She asked me to sing something to her. Absolutely not. I was standing in my employer's kitchen, surrounded by successful professional entertainers, discussing my extremely modest history in local musicals. I declined. They persisted. So finally I gave in. My go-to karaoke song at the time was Patsy Cline's Crazy. I sang it for them. When I finished, they applauded. Dolly seemed delighted that I knew an old country standard like that. I told her Patsy Cline's voice reminded me of my mother's, and when I was little, listening to Patsy sing used to comfort me whenever my mom went out of town. They complimented my voice. I thanked them but insisted that I wasn't even the singer in my family. My sister had studied opera, and my brother was pursuing music professionally. Then Dolly got a call that her driver was around the corner. She hugged me one more time. "Stay in touch," she said, and she went outside. I went back to check in on the kids. Near the kitchen table, the family had security monitors in the kitchen, showing the cameras around the property, and we could see Dolly outside waiting for her car. The kid's dad looked at me. "You really don't know who you just sang for, do you?" he asked. I shook my head. No. He looked back towards the monitor. "I hope she doesn't have to wait long," he said. "I hate to leave her outside alone." I looked up. "She's not alone. Her assistant is with her," I said. He looked at me. "She didn't have an assistant with her," he said. I glanced towards the security monitor. The woman I'd seen earlier was still there. The same young woman who had quietly helped settle the children. The same woman I'd assumed worked for Dolly. I pointed towards the screen and asked, "Then who is the lady in the blue dress?" He stared at me. "What lady in a blue dress?"